Okay, so ladies and gentlemen, you are welcome. Uh, Please don't forget to join my YouTube community. And in this video, we are going to look at the concept of cell membrane. And of course, in my YouTube, you can have videos available like biostatistics, general physiology, like human physiology 227 and 225 are all available. But you have to join as a member for you to have access to all those videos. So, of course, now for biochemistry, in this video, we are going to look at the concept of cell membrane. And of course, let's start with the description of the cell membrane. And of course, when we had the word cell membrane, it is also known as a plasma membrane. The other name for the cell membrane is called plasma membrane, and it surrounds the cell cytoplasm. You know that cytoplasm is the part of the cell that contains all the organelles in which all other organelles of the cell are suspended. So the cell membrane, which is the major component of the cell that contain all the cellular organelles, it is surrounded by this cell membrane. And the cell membrane, it acts a barrier separating the interior of the cell from the external environment. And the most important things in the cell membrane is important for maintaining homeostasis within the cell. That is maintaining of the internal or maintaining the regulation of the cell. That is, it involves in trying to maintain the balance of what will get in and out of the cell. And of course, like now look at the cell itself. So look at the cell membrane. So you see the cell membrane, it surround the entire cell. And when we said entire cell, it means the cytoplasm, because cytoplasm, it is the fluid component of the cell in which all the organelles of the cell are suspended. So it contain or it carry all the organelles of the cell like mitochondria, Golgi, the lysosome, ribosomes. They are all there. And of course, if you can see clearly from here, we'll realize that, of course, we have the cell membrane at it you see, as you can see it here, it covers the entire cell. That is why we say it actually separates the interior of the cell and external environment. So this is the interior, that is whatever is inside, it is the interior of the cell, and outside is the external environment. So it is the cell membrane that separates the interior of the cell and outside of the cell, that is the external environment. So, and of course, we can see clearly it's around the cytoplasm. And very importantly, the structure of the cell membrane, it is actually majorly, or it's primarily composed of a phospholipid bilayer. And of course, the membrane is fully embedded, or the lipid bilayer of this cell is fully embedded with, or it contains proteins, cholesterol, and carbohydrates. And we see how they are arranged. And the unique structure allows the fluidity and flexibility, enable cellular movement. So look at the membrane of the cell. We realize that you can see clearly here, this is our phospholipid bilayer. So it is majorly made up of phospholipid bilayer, and the phospholipid bilayer is made up of hydrophobic tail and hydrophilic heads. And you can see that clearly from here, this the bilayer, as you can see, this is the first layer. These are the bilayer. It is called, because it is a double layer, it is called lipid bilayer. And of course, you can see clearly that we have proteins, and look at them, like globular proteins as an example of proteins that are found in the cell membrane. We have integral protein here, and we have uh, peripheral membrane proteins. We also have cell membrane receptor proteins. So all these are the proteins that are found on the cell membrane. And in addition, there are also cholesterol. So cholesterol, as you can see clearly here, is also found in the cell membrane. And in addition, we have carbohydrates. You can see that we have carbohydrate sugar chain. So this is actually the major biomolecules that are embedded within the phospholipid bilayer. So you see, the structure of the cell membrane is majorly made up of phospholipid bilayer, and this phospholipid bilayer is made up of hydrophobic head, you shouldn't forget this, and hydrophobic tail. And in addition, other major biomolecules are also embedded, which include proteins, cholesterol, and carbohydrates. And these structures, that is, this phospholipid bilayer embedded with these biomolecules, is what make the membrane to have the fluidity nature. That is, it is fluidity in nature. It means that it is liquid in nature, and of course, and they are flexible. So this fluidity and flexible is what enable cell movement. It's what actually make the cell movement, especially the movement of the particles or molecules across the cell or in and out of the cell. That is fluidity and flexibility. So more importantly, the phospholipid bilayer, as I said, they have both hydrophobic heads and hydrophilic tails. So you can see when you said hydrophobic or hydrophilic tails, it is a part of the membrane that it can interact with water molecules. So hydrophilic heads is a part of the cell membrane that interact with water molecules or water soluble molecules. And then hydrophobic tails, it is actually a part of the cell membrane that doesn't interact with water. It doesn't interact with water. So this phospholipid, which is hydrophilic heads and hydrophobic tails, is what actually created the bilayer, that is the double layer of the cell membrane. So this arrangement helps to keep water-soluble substances from crossing easily. So it's because of this arrangement of the cell membrane, and that is why the water-soluble substances can easily cross the cell membrane. Because if the water soluble substances is actually trying to get into the cell, it will be interacting with the hydrophilic head, which is the polar component, that is the water lovers. Hydrophilic means they like water, so they interact with water substances or water soluble substances. So it is this arrangement that make it very important in allowing water soluble substances to cross the cell membrane. And this barrier is fundamental to the membrane functions as a selective barrier. When we say selective barrier, it means that it is this cell membrane that actually allows some materials to get into it, and also disallow some of the material to get into them. And of course, there are important nutrients that are important so cell can get, that can allow them to get into the cell within the cell membrane, and then the harmful substances will not be allowed to get into the cell or will be exit through the cell membrane because of this selective permeability nature. So let's look at the phospholipid bilayer. So look at the phospholipid bilayer. You can see this is the extracellular environment. So the extracellular environment is made up of is made of you can see clearly hydrophilic heads. So all these ones, they are hydrophilic heads. This one is also hydrophilic heads. So they are always find either outside or interior. So the hydrophobic tail, which is uh, the non-polar component, which is the component that doesn't associate with water, they remain hidden. So they hide themselves. While the hydrophilic component, where it interacts with water or water-soluble substances, they are exposed to the cell membrane. And that is why they are called lipid bilayer. So the hydrophilic tail, they are exposed on the surface, while the hydrophobic tail, they remain hidden. So that is actually the phospholipid bilayer. So you can see that it is actually made up of hydrophilic heads. So this hydrophilic heads, and this one is also hydrophilic heads. While here is hydrophobic tail, that is the component that doesn't interact with water. So then, what are the proteins that are found in the cell membrane? So generally in the cell membrane, the proteins are classified into two. There are integral protein and then peripheral proteins. So the integral proteins, they are proteins that span the membrane and are involved in transport and signaling. So the integral proteins, they are proteins that fully embedded into the cell membrane, and they are actually important in transporting molecules. So integral proteins sometimes even act as a channel where the molecules can actually be transported from outside into the cell or from inside to outside of the cell. And it is also very important in cellular signaling. That is how one cell communicates with one another. So it is also important in signaling, that is sending signal from one cell to another, how one cell communicate with another cell. So it is these integral proteins that do that. So you see, integral protein is important in transport and signaling, and you shouldn't forget that. And then in addition, we have peripheral proteins, which usually partially or attached to the exterior and interior surface, and it plays a role in cell communication. So cell do communicate. Like for example, if a cell is infected with a particular virus or with a particular bacteria, that cell can communicate with another cell that, okay, I am infected with so types of bacterial cell. So you should purify yourself against any attack by the same bacteria or by the same virus. So this is how cell communicate, or maybe if there is any injury in one cell, then one cell can also communicate with one another. So cellular communication are controlled by peripheral proteins. So you shouldn't forget that. The integral protein is important in transportation and signaling, and then the peripheral proteins, they are important in communication. So let's look at them. We can see clearly here, these are the peripheral membrane proteins, and you will realize that these peripheral membrane proteins, they partially attach themselves on the cell membrane. And then the next thing, apart from the peripheral proteins, then is also the integral protein. So this is actually truly, if you can see, this is the real integral protein because it is fully embedded. It is fully embedded. It's span across the cell membrane. So that is the integral protein. And this one is also another example of integral protein. It's the multi-pass transmembrane protein. So this is actually a typical example of integral proteins. But for the peripheral proteins, you can see that the partially or the transiently attach itself to the interior surface of the cell. So they are usually partially attach themselves to the interior or exterior of the cell. So then the next thing is the role of cholesterol. What is the importance of cholesterol in the cell membrane? And if you could remember, I told you that part of the molecules that are found on the cell membrane is there is also cholesterol. So what is important of cholesterol? So cholesterol are interpassed within phospholipids bilayer, which means that they are spread within the phospholipid bilayer. And this cholesterol, ladies and gentlemen, you should get this also. It stabilizes membrane fluidity. So it stabilizes the membrane fluidity and also prevent it from becoming too rigid. So it is the work of the cell membrane to actually stabilize the membrane fluidity and also prevent the cell membrane to become too rigid. And this cholesterol is also essential for maintaining cell functionality and or proper cell functionality and integrity. So you see, it is important for maintaining cell function and integrity. It's also important in stabilizing the membrane fluidity. So you shouldn't forget about this as a function of the cholesterol on the cell membrane, fluidity maintenance or stabilizing fluidity, and also maintaining proper cellular function and integrity. So this is how the cholesterol looks like. You see, this is the phospholipids. This is the phospholipid heads, that is hydrophilic head, and this is the tail. So you can see that the hydrophobic tail, the cholesterol is found in between the hydrophilic head, and of course, they are found in the around the hydrophobic cell. So this is how the structure of cholesterol looks like on the cell membrane. So then the next thing is, of course, the carbohydrates that are found on the cell membrane. So carbohydrates on the cell membrane usually are attached to proteins and lipids. So usually they are found as either they are found attached to either proteins or lipids. So if you have carbohydrate attached with proteins, they are called glycoproteins. And if you have, of course, the lipids plus carbohydrate is called glycoprotein. So sugar, which is carbohydrates, when you have carbohydrates plus lipids, so it will give you the sugar means glyco. So it will give you what you call a glycolipid. And if it is proteins, it's called glycoprotein. So sugar plus protein is glycoproteins. And then sugar plus lipid is called glycolipid. So these glycoproteins and glycolipid are critical for cell recognition and communication. So it helps in cellular recognition, that is recognizing one cell, because of course in our body we have various cells. So how our cells recognize our own cell, how our cell recognize bacteria cell, how our cell recognize virus cell. So that is this cellular recognition, so that when cell realize that there are new or recognize new cells that are not needed in the body, then it will now mount immune response. So that is why glycoproteins and glycolipids, they are very important in cellular recognition and communication. So cell recognize one another with the aid of glycoproteins and glycolipids, and then also communicate. So when a cell recognize a bacteria cell, so a bacteria cells are the cell that can cause disease in our body, or virus, there are particle that can also cause disease in our body. So it's a work of our cells using glycoproteins and glycolipids to recognize those cells that are not needed, that can cause damage in our body. Then after the recognition, then they will now communicate with our body, and then our body will now mount immune response in order to eliminate those bacteria or those cells that are not needed by our body. And more importantly, these glycoproteins and glycolipids, they are very important in tissue formation. So if you have cells, how these cells combine to produce tissue is through communicating, binding, and conjugating of the glycoproteins and glycolipids. So they will combine themselves with the help of the glycoproteins and the glycolipids. So you see, this is how they are. They are also found as part of the cell membrane. This is the glycolipids, you see, and then this is the glycoprotein. So they usually found on the surface of the cell membrane. So then what are the function of the cell membrane? So the primary function of the cell membrane is to regulate the movement of substances. So it is actually the work of this cell membrane to regulate what substance can get in and out of the cell. And then it also allows essential nutrients like carbohydrate, proteins, lipids, drugs to enter while keeping harmful substances out. So that is the selective permeability nature of the cell membrane. It allows essential nutrients to get into the cell, and then keeping all harmful substances out. So then, in addition, the cell membrane facilitates communication between cells through signaling molecules. So generally, how cell communicates, there are signaling molecules that are released by the cell that facilitates the communication between cells of our body. So you see, the cellular communication is the work of the cell membrane through signaling molecules. So, of course, on the issue of the cell membrane, there are different types of the membrane transport. As we said that it controls the movement of substances. So the different types of transport system in our body, I think let me just briefly describe it, although we are going to have another video set that will also address us on the transport of molecules across the cell membrane. So we have simple diffusion is one of the types of the transport system where molecules are transported from the region of the lower concentration to the region where their concentration is lower. You see here, the concentration of this molecule here is only 1. So it means that it is low. So a simple diffusion is a type of movement where molecules will move themselves from the region where they are of high concentration. Look at it here, they are high, and then they'll be transported to the region where they are low, and that is simple diffusion. Then for the facilitated diffusion, it is a type of transport that require a carrier to move substances across the cell from the region of higher, also the region of lower concentration. Then the next thing is primary active transport. So we have primary transport or active transport. So active transport is a type of transport of molecules that require energy. It requires ATP, and the molecules are usually moved from the region where their concentration is higher. Look at it here. It's only 1 concentration, and here the concentration of the molecules are high. So in the case of active transport, the molecules are moving from the region where they are low to the region where they are high. So it is against concentration gradient. So energy is required. So that is why here you see ATP. So ATP is required in the case of the primary active transport. So this is actually the major types of transport system. You see the transport mechanism, they are divided into passive and active. So the passive transport doesn't require energy to move molecules across the cell membrane, while active transport require energy to move substances across the cell membrane. And that is why this active transport is also divided into two. It's divided into two. We have primary active transport and we have secondary active transport. And of course, we are going to look at these types of transport in our next lecture or in our next video lecture. And don't forget, ladies and gentlemen, I will attach the link to this video. So immediately after you watch this video, check my discussion box on this video and watch the next video. So then, of course, the passive transport, it involves the movement of substances along their concentration gradient. That is the concentration, sorry, that is the region where their concentration is low. So they are moving from the region where their concentration is high to the region where their concentration is low. So, and no energy is required. While in the case of active transport, is transport molecules across the region where the concentration of the molecule is higher. And in the active transport, it requires energy to move the substances. So you see, this one is along their gradient. That is where their concentration is very high. So from the region where the concentration is low to the region where the concentration is high, and they require energy in the form of ATP. So then the next thing is the membrane potential. So the membrane maintain a difference in charge across its surface, which is known as the membrane potential. So you see, when you have the membrane of the cell, there is usually a charge differences across its surface. And that charge differences is known as the membrane potential. So this potential is crucial for processes such as nerve impulse transmission and muscle contraction. So the nerve impulse transmission and muscle contraction, or the communication between neuron cells and the myocytes. Neuron cells are the cells, the brain, and the myocytes are the cells of the muscles. So usually there are communication processes across the neuron cells and the myocytes. And this transmission is aided by these charge differences known as potential. So the membrane potential is very important in transmitting nerve impulse and then muscle contraction. So change in membrane potential can trigger various cellular responses and activities. So let's look at the the charge differences. So you see, if you can check from the extracellular fluids, the charge are positive, and then from the intracellular, the charge are negative. So you see, this is a charge differences across the surface. You see, what you have in the cytosol is different from what you have in the extracellular fluid. So the charges are not the same. So is this different? Is these differences that generate cell membrane potential? So then, what are the importance of the cell membrane? So the cell membrane is vital for survival and function of all living cells. So all living cells, they need this cell membrane for their survival and function for all the living cells that are found in every living organism. And its structure and composition allow the complex interaction with the environment. And you can see that the structure, cholesterol, the integral and peripheral proteins, the carbohydrates that are found, they are all important in the complex interaction between the cell and the environment itself. So understanding the cell membrane is essential for advances in medical and biological research. So, ladies and gentlemen, this is the end of this lecture, and I hope this lecture will be important to all of you. Please don't forget to join and subscribe to my YouTube channel. See you next.